bodies of people who had been butchered. The depravity of it is haunting.
This is an act of terror it cannot stand.
Our first resolution that we pass under Speaker Steve Scalise will be to make it clear that we stand with Israel. The McCall Meeks resolution will be our first order of business.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The House of Representatives remains a darkened, shuttered shell. It is, for the moment, an institution that signifies precisely nothing, a political joke that is not remotely funny. The Republican majority that theoretically runs the House continues to run in a circle of indecision and legislative infirmity. That means you can see lots of lawmakers scurrying down hallways going no one quite knows where. This while Israel absorbs horrors unseen since the Holocaust. Israel is on a war footing. The U.S. has pledged full support, but will need a fully functioning Congress to follow through. Historically, the House of Representatives has always been there to answer a distress call from Israel. Not now. The House can't even answer a distress call from the Senate. That's because there's no speaker. There is a Republican nominee, Steve Scalise of Louisiana. He has the support of slightly more than half his fellow Republicans. That's not nearly enough to become Speaker. So a vote to make Scalise Speaker exists, like the House itself, in a state of suspended animation. Now, the Constitution gives the House vital powers denied the Senate, the power to tax and spend. I've covered Congress off and on since 1990, and in all that time, I have never observed a House majority so willing to degrade these unique institutional powers. Spending is a very big matter just now. Government funding expires November 17th. Israel has needs. Ukraine has needs. Spending more on border control is now moving close to something approximating a bipartisan imperative. But to spend anything on Israel, Ukraine, or the border, the House must reconstruct itself out of the ashes of its irresolute disorganization. That can only be done by those who campaigned in 2022 to become the majority party in the House. You remember, the ones who promised to change course, to govern, to deliver results, and to be held accountable. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, it's been a very rambunctious day, to put it mildly, on Capitol Hill. What is the latest on the timing of that speakership vote?
Well, the short answer, Major, is we don't know. You know, the House convened at 3 p.m. and immediately went into recess. And this was after House Republicans had a secret ballot where they nominated Steve Scalise, the majority leader, to be their designated speaker. But as you just noted, that vote was quite close, and the conference remains narrowly divided. He won 113 to 99 in that closed-door session, but ultimately he will need approximately 217 votes to become speaker. And the bottom line is that he is not there. There have been several meetings that have been ongoing throughout the afternoon and the better part of the day, but as of now, no floor vote has been scheduled.
And Nicole, as you probably know, I certainly got text to this. I'm sure you got far more than I did. There was this brief hour or so period where there was this intent from the Scalise camp to go to the floor and have the full-fledged vote. And I started getting texts, wait a minute, he may not be ready. They may not have the votes. They might want to think that through. That's clearly what happened. Does that suggest that Scalise feels ultimately, and the team around him, that they can get to that 217, or that they have a lot more work to do than they originally anticipated?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, obviously, in the case of Steve Scalise, he is a former whip, so he knows how to round up votes. We also know that Jim Jordan, his opponent in this race, is throwing his support behind Scalise. A source tells us that he does plan to vote for Scalise and is encouraging his supporters to do the same. But that being said, there have been a number of members that have been very vocal, both as they exited the meeting earlier today and also on social media, saying that they are going to stand by Jordan, that they don't intend to switch their vote. There are also other members saying that they may still support Kevin McCarthy, and that So right now, things are in a state of flux. We did hear from a number of members as they exited balloting earlier today. Take a listen to what they had to say. How do you get unity?
Unity is not easy to achieve, and it looks different in different ways. In my mind, how unity looked, and I said this to them clearly, is that we need to unify around the idea of the priorities that we want, select a person by the majority, the person winning the majority vote, and then uniting around that person on the floor. That's unity in my mind.
I'm optimistic we'll get there. Obviously, this is going to be a decision for each individual member on the floor, but I'm hopeful that we unite.
I would have preferred Jordan, but I committed to vote for the winner, and that was Scalise. Steve is straightforward, and Steve will go to work, and Steve will listen to all sides. So I'm happy about that. It's time to cut the lights back on.
So there you have an instance where Congressman Ralph Norman preferred Jim Jordan, but says he will now support Scalise. But then there are other members, for instance, Max Miller of Ohio, who I also talked to, also a member of the Ohio delegation, who says he's going to continue to back Jordan regardless, although he said he could potentially be persuaded. So that is likely some of the conversations that are underway right now, how Scalise can start flipping some of these votes if he wants to become Speaker.
Nicole, much was made when it happened of former President Trump's endorsement of Jim Jordan to be the next speaker. Clearly, that didn't work out for Jordan's benefit. As best you can tell, what effect, if any, did that endorsement from the former president have on Jordan's prospects?
Well, clearly it wasn't enough to get Jordan over the finish line, at least internally, although, again, many members sticking by him. And some members have suggested to a certain extent this may have been a proxy with respect to the former president, although some of his close allies, for instance, Congressman Troy Nehls, says that he is still the head of the Republican Party, and he, in particular, will continue to stand by him. I think the other thing worth pointing out in terms of why we're seeing this divide is that Republicans were really fractured over the process. It's not so much with these leaders per se and their personalities, although some may be more partial to one over the other, but it was really how House Republicans are going to govern going forward. There was a significant contingent of the Republican conference that wanted to change the rules, that believed they should unite behind a speaker, behind closed doors, that nominee should get those 217 votes behind closed doors before they move to the floor. That measure was defeated in today's closed-door session. That was actually a measure that Steve Scalise rallied against, and to a certain extent, that's why we saw him emerge as the victor. The other issue that's been dividing the conference is this whole issue of the motion to vacate. As we know, that is how former Speaker Kevin McCarthy was ousted when Matt Gaetz, congressman from Florida, put forth that resolution to ultimately oust him from the speakership. And so there's been a lot of discussion among members about changing that, about reforming those rules. So that's also why you're seeing a divide among members.
Rarely in House history has procedure been so important. Nicole Killian, thank you so much. To discuss the latest on Israel-Hamas war, CBS News foreign correspondent MTS Tabak joins us now in northern Israel. MTS, great to see you. Thank you so much for all of your reporting and hard work there. Describe the level of concern within the Israeli government about the potential of conflict in the northern part of Israel on the border with Lebanon.
Major, good to be with you. Well, I'm about 15 miles away from that border, that very tense border. And the short answer is Israel is very concerned. In fact, earlier today, our team came across what essentially was a very long column of Israeli tanks and soldiers. It is very clear that Israel is mobilizing forces here in the north. We've obviously been talking a lot about the south, where that horrific attack carried out by Hamas took place, where we've been reporting that dozens of battalions have been mobilizing in front of the Gaza fence, that 360,000 Israelis have volunteered as part of a volunteer corps. But in the north, there's also seen a major mobilization. Why is that? Well, over the past 4 days, Israel has been trading rocket fire with Palestinian factions inside Lebanon, but perhaps most worrying, with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is perhaps the most powerful military force inside of Lebanon. It is a very formidable foe, and if Israel were to engage into any kind of conflict with Hezbollah, it could truly risk engulfing this entire region. Major.
And it is also, as you mentioned, MTS, clear that the preparations are being made for a possible ground invasion of Gaza. It is impossible to describe in every way what that would look like, but what could you tell us and tell our viewers to prepare for should that come to pass?
Dangerous, scary, unpredictable, uncertain. The reality is that a ground invasion of Gaza, which is essentially about double the size of Washington, D.C., not a very big place, has often been described as the world's largest open-air prison with 2.3 million people living there in a very densely populated area. For Israeli forces to enter by ground, it is very difficult terrain, it is very dangerous terrain, and the big question is, if it enters Gaza, what is its ultimate military objective? Does it want to reoccupy Gaza like it did up until 2005 before it disengaged? What would that occupation look like? Would it mean an Israeli soldier and an Israeli tank on the corner of every street in Gaza? These are huge questions, but the reality is that Hamas is also inside Gaza, as we know, holding dozens and dozens of hostages, including some Americans. And that, of course, is also part of Israel's calculus as to whether or not it will go inside Gaza.
Complicated calculus indeed. MTS Tabak in northern Israel. Thank you so very much. After the break, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall joins us. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A bipartisan group of nearly 400 lawmakers introduced a resolution condemning Hamas's deadly attack on Israel. Republican Congressman Mike McCall joins us now. He's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. We'll get to Israel, Hamas, and all the many complexities in just a second. But first, when do you expect a speaker vote in the House of Representatives? How soon can the country anticipate a fully functioning House of Representatives?
Well, very soon. We did nominate Steve Scalise as the speaker designee. Now we're into vote counting. We don't want to go through the 15 rounds of ballots like we did last time. So what we're trying to do is make sure we have 217 before we even go to the floor, and that's what's being negotiated right now. Jim Jordan has agreed to support Steve as speaker, and I think right now they're doing a whip count. So it could be later tonight, it could be tomorrow. I hope it's as soon as possible because, as you know, the world is becoming more dangerous, and we need to govern.
Do you have any doubt, Mr. Chairman, it will be done this week?
I sure hope so. I mean,
that's not the same.
I never thought what happened to Kevin McCarthy is going to happen either. I'm astounded. I've been up here 20 years now, and I haven't seen anything like that. But I do think with the crises popping up, particularly this issue with Israel, the war now in the Middle East, threat to Europe by Putin and Chairman Xi threatening the Pacific, we can't play games. We need a speaker in the chair to govern for the American people and get the people's business done. It's not a time to be playing games anymore, and we need to all be adults in the room and step forward.
Mr. Chairman, to what degree are you making phone calls or consulting members on behalf of Team Scalise to get to that 217?
Yeah, I've talked to a few undecideds. It's hard to know how many there are at this point in time. It could be anywhere from 5 to 15. So right now we're trying to, we need to unify as a party. I don't think this helps my party at all when you see dysfunction on the House floor. I mean, we have to unify. And quite frankly, Greg Meeks, my ranking member, we introduced a resolution that will be the first bill after the speaker's instated, a resolution condemning Hamas and supporting Israel. And that's a bipartisan resolution. We have 416 co-sponsors. And it's important we do that soon to show the American people have a voice in their representatives who are getting this done to show that America supports Israel.
So let's talk about Israel. The president said today he has not given up hope on rescuing Americans believed to be held by Hamas. How difficult will that be, and where do you fall on that scale of hope?
Well, I have great hope, too. I know that our special forces are training the IDF military, the hostage rescue team, FBI, are helping. We were in Iraq for a long time. It's going to go from the command and control phase of bombing to going house to house, building to building, kind of what we did in Fallujah in 2004. Our special operators know how to do this best. But it's not going to be over anytime soon. It's going to take not days or weeks, but probably months. And it gets this will get very bloody to go in, because they use the hostages as human shields to protect them, whether it's in the tunnels or in the buildings. And when you go into a building like that, it's very, very dangerous. So they want to root out the terrorists in Gaza, and they want to rescue the hostages. And of course, we have many, roughly about 17 missing Americans now, many of whom we think are hostages at this point.
You mentioned this will take some time. As you well know, commercial air traffic to Israel is almost non-existent now. Do you believe the administration should take steps to provide flight out for Americans who may want to leave Israel and do so soon? And have you heard anything about an announcement in that space?
I do. And we have C-130s we could deploy tomorrow if we wanted to. We have about, roughly, 550,000 Americans in Israel. And a lot of them are dual citizens. But whether it be commercial or military, if they want to get out, I think it's our duty to protect them and get them out. And get them out of harm's way. As I said, this is going to get worse before it gets better, and this is going to get very hot in the Gaza. What we worry about the most, Major, is an escalation in the conflict, like in Lebanon with Hezbollah. They have 100,000 rockets at their disposal. This is the nightmare scenario that we would war game, and if that happens, the Iron Dome cannot sustain that overload. And that's what we worry about the most. As they're running out, of the rockets needed for the Iron Dome, they also need precision-guided weapons and ammunition. That's why we got to get a speaker in the chair, get an emergency supplemental to help Israel win this effort.
Bringing those two subjects together, speakership, aid to Israel and others, possibly Ukraine, possibly also Taiwan. Congressman Mike McCall, Chairman, Foreign Affairs Committee, thanks so much for your time. When we come back, what the war in Israel means for other conflicts around the globe. We'll discuss that with our panel. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As the war between Israel and Hamas rages on, some are looking at this war as part of a new and destabilized world order. Vivian Salama and John Alterman join us now. Vivian is a national security reporter for the Wall Street Journal. John is the Senior Vice President for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he also holds the role of Zbigniew Brzezinski Chair in Global Security. John, one of the cliches about the Middle East is cycle of violence. This doesn't feel like that. This feels, to me, of a completely different order and borderline cataclysmic for the state of Israel.
I think Hamas was a lot more successful than they expected to be. I think they thought some of what they were planning might work. A lot of what they were planning ended up working. There were a lot more Israeli casualties than we've ever seen since the 1948 War of Independence. This idea of 150 hostages brought into Gaza, this is unprecedented. I think Hamas actually created a huge problem for itself rather than simply having a symbolic win over Israel, as Egypt did in the 1973 war when it crossed the Suez Canal. It ended up creating a circumstance where Israel will fundamentally destroy Hamas's capacity in Gaza. I think Hamas is going to, in the long term, be a big loser here. But there's going to be a lot of dying that happens before that.
No doubt. Vivian, I don't know if you were able to hear Mike McCall, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, saying this is going to get worse before it gets better. This is going to be bloodier, and it's going to take months not days or weeks. This is not cycle of violence
And
stuff.
that is very...
Not to minimize cycle of violence, but this is something of a different magnitude.
And that's very much the assessment, Major, of the U.S. And its European allies who are kind of bracing for a prolonged battle here. You know, what we've seen in recent years is these skirmishes that have happened, including most recently in 2021 between Hamas and Israel, where the U.S. was able to sort of sweep in with the help of Egypt and other allies to say, guys, you know, let's talk about this. And within 10, 12 days max, they were able to resolve it. No one thinks that that's going to happen here because of the scale of the attack that happened in Israel and how unprecedented it is. And you now see, because of the force posturing that the U.S. is doing, that they are really bracing for a potentially expanded war. And what we mean by that is, you know, opening the northern front with Lebanon, potentially other activity happening in the region that really raises the stakes here from just, you know, not to diminish it, but just an Israel-Hamas battle.
Jonathan, you're an expert in the region. You and I have known each other for many, many years. I want to help the audience separate Hamas from the Palestinian civilians who live in Gaza. There are conversations, Antony Blinken referred to them today, multi-partner conversation. Can there be some sort of corridor opened, possibly to Egypt, to get some of the civilians out? Because if there is, as it inevitably seems there will be, a ground invasion of Gaza, those civilians who may or may not have any necessary support for Hamas will suffer. And that's going to be a major catastrophe on the other side of this conflict as well.
In addition to which, as you rightly point out, Hamas doesn't have universal support. Arguably, it doesn't even have strong support in Gaza, but they have the guns in Gaza. They control a lot of money in Gaza. There's no way to get out of Gaza. You can't get a visa in many cases. The Egyptians certainly have not wanted a flood of Palestinians from Gaza. Nobody really has wanted Gazans, and they've been trapped in this circumstance. Some then support Hamas and say, well, if I'm not happy, nobody's going to be happy. But as you rightly point out, we're going to be in a circumstance where, yes, a lot of Hamas fighters will be killed, Hamas supporters will be killed, people who are innocent bystanders will be killed, and some will suffer because of lack of food, electricity, all the other things that are going to affect 2 million people in Gaza.
John, can I just add to that point? Because Secretary Blinken, as we sit here, is on a plane to Israel. And one of the things he said on the tarmac before leaving is that there are intense discussions with Egypt to try to secure perhaps an opening of the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt to allow it in. But even that option presents enormous struggles because the Egyptian government is very reluctant to open that border. They themselves have had issues with militant activity in the Sinai, that area right there. They don't want to open the possibility of having an incursion or any kind of activity like that in their own region. And so while they're sympathetic to the Gaza civilians, they're worried about their own security.
A phone call to Jordan will tell you about the lived experience of being an off-ramp for Palestinian refugees. Absolutely. Jordan has done that for years, and it has stressed their infrastructure, it has stressed their politics, it stressed their reality.
And there was an effort to overthrow the monarchy, right, in Black September. The other piece is that all the Arab governments see Hamas as two things they hate. It's a political Islam group, which is armed, like the Muslim Brotherhood is something they fear, and it's a proxy of Iran.
Proxy of Iran.
Which they all are opposed to. So the idea that they would come to the aid of Hamas, no, I think strategically they identify with Israel and Israel's strategic view. Their publics are not there, and whether they get caught is, I think, a very important question to watch in the coming weeks.
In 15 seconds, Jonathan, do you believe that one of the Hamas's motives was to undercut what was looking to be a rapprochement or a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
I don't think Saudi Arabia, the Abraham Accords, this train was moving before. It is that general sense that you can have peace for Israel and leave us locked in Gaza. And Gaza said, hell no, we're going to fight our way out.
Fight our way out. To what conclusion, none of us can quite tell. Vivian Salama, Jonathan Alterman, thanks so very much. That does it for today. You probably already know this. You're streaming CBS News.